English translation 638th contact. Monday the 14th of December 2015, 18 hours.
Greetings, dear Edward, my friend.
You come unexpectedly, Ta, dear friend. What brings you here so unexpectedly?
There was something urgent that I had to do with Florina and Anjana.
Oh, I do not care about that.
You are not curious, I know. Today, I would like to use the time to discuss some things with you privately.
All right, my son, we can do that. But look here, I have a question from a worried person from Germany beforehand. Why I want to give you the whole thing to read about. Can you say something then, please?
Ta reads.
Dear Billy, in the 632nd contact conversation, Quetzal said that Angela Merkel and other power-hungry members of the EU government want to ruin Germany. It is a monstrosity that the majority of people in Germany cannot imagine, because they consider such a perfidious thing simply impossible or the spawning of a conspiracy theory. You have expressed the assumption that Angela Merkel wants to harm Germany out of hatred and revenge, which was confirmed by Quetzal on 22.10. 2015. She seems to want to realize this evil intention through her so-called welcoming culture towards illegal immigrants, who are collectively referred to as refugees, and through whom terrorists also come to Europe. This is proven by the terrorist attacks in France, which will soon become reality in Germany, which is unfortunately to be feared. In order to defend oneself against it, the whole truth about this woman should come to light. Many Germans feel helpless and powerless at the mercy of Angela Merkel's madness, politics, refugees, EU, Greece, stationing of US weapons in Germany, etc. And the followers in power seem not to want to do anything about it, because they only think of their own power and their possessions, etc. For a long time there has been a rumor that she was im informelle Mitarbeiterin of the GDR Stasi, that is to say, practically a Secret Service employee. Below you can find an article from the internet. Now the questions: are you or are the player more aware of the personal or the Stasi past, and the motives of Angela Merkel, what may be published? Why are Merkel and others interested in ruining Germany? Are there only the USA and its world domination plans behind it, or are there other interests and masterminds? Best wishes, a concerned citizen from Germany, name and address known.
Excerpt from the 632nd contact of 22.10. 2015.
As far as the threat of the Islamist state is concerned, it is very great because it is constantly increasing because of the refugee system. Namely because Islamist sleepers, and thus murderous adventurers and fanatics, are uncontrollably smuggled into Europe and other states, where they can then bring their deadly mischief to bear. And the fact that this can happen in Europe, I have no choice but to say this, is due to the stupidity, hatred, revenge, and boundless irresponsibility of German Chancellor Angela Merkel, who paved the way for this human catastrophe. This is a fact that causes both the German people and the peoples of the states of the dictatorial European Union to revolt and provokes malignant unrest, which may lead to civil war-like uprisings, for which not much is lacking according to the current state of the refugee disaster. On the one hand, and on the other, various countries of the European Union are forced, for the good of their own country and its people, to take drastic violent countermeasures, either by erecting border fences and preventing refugees from entering the country, as has been the case for weeks, or by directly using force against refugees. And with regard to the refugees, it should also be mentioned that our extensive investigations have shown that the majority of all refugees are not real refugees, to the detriment of the real refugees, but leave their homeland only because through the propaganda via public media, that all refugees are welcome in Germany and Europe and are cared for in every good way, all the people are tempted by Angela Merkel to flee their country and flee to Europe, to be cared for by the state in every imaginable way, cared for and, if desired, provided with all luxury goods. We know this by listening to many conversations of the so-called refugees, who in their naivety believe the lies and false promises of Angela Merkel, who wants to ruin Germany, as it is also in the interest of other power-hungry people in the EU government. But the German people know nothing of the fact that their country will be shamefully betrayed in this way and will be pushed off the pedestal. That must still be said.
Who is and what was Angela Merkel really about?
Here we want to uncover what this person really was in the past and what his real career was. She had won the election in 2005 only very narrowly. Although there were activities of other parties, such as the DAP, which was then admitted to the elections for the first time, that accused the CDU-CSU of electoral fraud at the time, this unfortunately came to nothing. Mrs. Merkel had only one intention. She wanted to go down in history as the first Chancellor of Germany. What she also succeeded in doing through some friends she could blind, such as Klaus Ulbricht, who used to be her department manager in the former GDR, because she did not care what happened to the people in Germany. She has, in the time when she was Council President of the EU, this almost brought to ruin. However, many may think that she was not entirely innocent of the world financial crisis. But later, let's start all over again. Here are some dates. The 17th of July, 1954. Angela Merkel is born as Angela Dorothea Kasner in Hamburg, as the child of the theology student Horst Kasner and the teacher Herlind Kasner, birth name Jentsch. Horst Kasner takes up a rectory post in Quitzau, Brandenburg. 1961, 1978. Merkel spends her childhood, youth, and early adulthood in the field of tension between the demands of the socialist state and the church. 1968. Merkel becomes an active member of the SED youth organization Freie Deutsche Jugend FDJ. 1973. Abitur at the extended high school EOS Hermann Matern in Templin, and start of physics studies at the University of Leipzig, where only those whose parents were particularly loyal to the line were allowed to study. Within the university, she was constantly looking for contacts to the Protestant student congregation. She was one of the few in the former GDR who had the privilege to study abroad. 1977. Marriage to the physics student Ulrich Merkel. 1978. Graduated in physics and hired as a research assistant at the Central Institute of Physical Chemistry at the Academy of Sciences in Berlin. Research area will be quantum chemistry. In the same year, she became a cultural official of the FDJ at the Academy of Sciences. However, it does not officially join the Socialist Unity Party of Germany SED. She is the leading functionary there for agitation and propaganda, but has many contacts to the MFS and also many friendships. So too a Lieutenant Colonel Borchard Asterisk from MFS, 1986, Doctorate Dr. Röhr. Nat. With a dissertation on the calculation of velocity constants of reactions of simple hydrocarbons. At about the same time, Mrs. Merkel gets a permanent visa to enter Germany, West Berlin, and the West at any time. 1989, joins the Democratic Awakening Party DA. As a high-ranking MFS employee informed us, it was already foreseeable at that time that the leadership of the GDR would not last too long. That was clear to us when things happened with Prague and Hungary. This was also the reason why Mrs. Otherwise, they would have reacted sooner. After the fall of the Berlin Wall, Mrs. Merkel had the task of approaching the CDU, which happened as planned. Since the State Security Service MFS no longer existed, many comrades continued to work underground. And there are still groups today that are still active, but over the years there have been only small groups that continue to do their work nationwide. Mrs. Merkel was also well known with Wolfgang Schnur, co-founder of the DA, who was known at the MFS under the alias Torsten, and Dr. Ralph Schirmer. On 15.3, 1990, he was expelled from the DA. Merkel was officially listed as IM unofficial employee. The fact that this work could be continued so successfully is mainly due to Mrs. Merkel. Finally, he told us that without the MFS, Mrs. Merkel would not have been able to leave the country for Western countries. Our note: Merkel was deeply rooted in a crass Stasi environment with her family and all her personal contacts. Unfortunately, her file is gone, as is the photo she shows with her subordinate FDJs in front of Robert Haveman's house, whose house arrest she personally watched there. Rumor has it she had access to her file and personally took her away. It is also rumored that she herself had the picture she shows in front of Haveman's house, which many had seen before, removed. Whether Merkel has any professional qualities for her current job is highly controversial. What is certain is that she has deeply internalized the Stasi power games and still masters and practices them today. In the great powers in Germany and the USA, this former ardent supporter of communism and today's pragmatist has found the helpers who give her a gracious press in the public media at all times. It has nothing to do with democracy and the application of the law. And the fact that every social impetus in our country is gone has threaded it in and deepened it in the Grand Coalition. After all, she knows from GDR times that the preservation of power does not depend on right and wrong, as long as you only master the dibble-dabble tour correctly. She also starts from the statement of a Russian politician at the time, who said, "It does not matter how elections take place, it depends on who and how people are counted." Because as a functionary in the GDR, she learned extensively how to commit electoral fraud and how to conceal it. That's what our Chancellor's supposed to be. Phi Devil, 1990, February 1989. Merkel is appointed DA press spokeswoman. With a view to the People's Chamber elections in March, the DA, the German Social Union DSU, and the Christian Democratic Union CDU of the GDR found the alliance Alliance for Germany. The 18th of March, the CDU becomes the strongest party in the GDR's first and only free elections to the People's Chamber. Merkel takes over the office of deputy government spokeswoman in the coalition government under Lothar de Maizière. August, joined the CDU of the GDR, which merged with the West German CDU on the 2nd of October 1990. September, Merkel is nominated as direct candidate of the CDU in the Bundestag election district Stralsund-Rügen-Grimmen. October-December, Speaker at the Press and Information Office of the Federal Government. The 2nd of December, the coalition of CDU, CSU and FDP receives 53.8% of the votes in the first all-German Bundestag election. Merkel is elected to the German Bundestag by direct mandate. 1991, the 17th of January, the Bundestag elects Helmut Kohl as the first Chancellor of reunited Germany. Merkel is appointed Federal Minister for Women and Youth the following day. The 23rd of November, Merkel is defeated by Ulf Fink in the elections for the presidency of the CDU Brandenburg. December. As successor to Lothar de Maizière, Merkel is elected deputy party leader at the CDU party conference in Dresden. 1992 to 1993. Chairman of the Evangelical Working Group, EAK, of the CDU-CSU. 1993, June, election as state chairman of the CDU in Mecklenburg-Western Pomerania. 1994, the 17th of November. Following the confirmation of the Christian Liberal government coalition by the Bundestag elections on the 16th of October, Merkel is appointed Federal Minister for the Environment, Nature Conservation and Nuclear Safety. 1999, the 22nd of December, Merkel calls on her party in an open letter to break away from her honorary chairman Kohl because of the donations affair. 2000, March. The Federal Executive of the CDU unanimously nominates Merkel as a candidate for party chair. The 10th of April. At the party conference in Essen, Merkel is elected chairman of the CDU in Germany. 2005, the 30th of May, Merkel is nominated as CDU-CSU Chancellor candidate for the announced early elections. The 18th of September, the Union wins 35.2% of the votes in the elections to the 16th German Bundestag. It cannot achieve its electoral goal of an absolute majority of CDU, CSU and FDP mandates. The 20th of September, re-election as leader of the parliamentary group. The 10th of October, SPD, CDU and CSU publish an agreement according to which Merkel is to be elected Chancellor. The 17th of October, start of coalition negotiations between CDU, CSU and SPD. The 22nd of November, Merkel is elected Chancellor of the Federal Republic of Germany with 397 of the 611 valid votes. SPD party leader Franz Müntefering will be Vice-Chancellor of the Grand Coalition. Merkel is the first female Chancellor in Germany and at 51, the youngest to hold office to date.
I can give more details about Angela Merkel in such a way that this woman is in no way aware of her responsibility and the full scope of her actions, because she cannot grasp, understand, or comprehend the whole thing. On the one hand, she is power-obsessed and self-opinionated. On the other hand, she is unscrupulous due to her lack of neediness and unrestrained and irresponsible in her disturbed behavior pattern of her personal psychological constitution. In another way, the woman does not act consciously but unconsciously in her naivety alien to reality, from which she is neither able to perceive nor judge the reality of reality and its truth. In addition, their actions result from psychopathically paranoid factors, which have arisen from post-war, erroneous and false educational as well as GDR political whispers, which deposited accordingly erroneous and false impulses in their subconscious and subconscious unconscious, who also produced a deep-rooted but unconscious hatred of Germany, which they express in their destructive ways of acting and behaving in the form of unconscious, conscious, and subconscious confused effects. The whole thing is based on the fact that the unconscious and, of course, the purely subconscious hatred, which is based on faulty and false educational factors and on Holocaust historical memories, is not conscious of it. Consequently, her profound but unconscious hatred with regard to the whole of the crime against humanity by degenerated German National Socialists, which she is unable to cope with, is not consciously founded in her consciousness.
Actually, all the actions and behavior of this woman in relation to her unconscious hatred of Germany and the German people is a case for psychiatry. How this on earth is still extremely deficient compared to yours, which has much more far-reaching insights and knowledge. Consequently, earthly psychiatrists and psychologists in their knowledge and understanding of psychology and psychiatry are somehow still undemanded. Consequently, they cannot make an accurate diagnosis about Angela Merkel's actual psychological conscious state. The majority of our psychologists and psychiatrists are really still completely naive, which means that they are unsuspecting, unscrupulous, naive, blue-eyed, simple-minded, good-believing, good-natured, gullible, naive, unrefined, without shrewdness, trusting, stupid, and gullible.
Unfortunately, since time immemorial, more theoretical factors have always been taken into account than effective by the specialists in this field. And this is still the case today, whereby the arrogance of earthly psychologists and psychiatrists is in the foreground, because they have fallen into the trap of believing and even believing and deluding that they would dominate their profession to the greatest possible extent, or even to the last comprehension. However, this is certainly not the case, because the knowledge of both psychology and psychiatry of earthly specialists in this field is only about 28% of our Plejaran knowledge and the knowledge of psychology and psychiatry. So it is not surprising that the relevant experts, who Angela Merkel has or would have to judge in this regard, are not able to analyze her entire inner being and her predisposition factors of her unconscious subconscious and those of the subconscious. The still very underdeveloped psychology and psychiatry of earthly specialists in this regard, unfortunately, brings with it the fact that very often incapable earthlings of both sexes can act in positions of state power.
With regard to the unconscious that is superior to consciousness, earthly psychologists and psychiatrists do not even have the slightest idea. Therefore, they do not know that this unconsciously affects the consciousness and thus also the human being's actions, deeds, and behavior without corresponding direct thoughts being consciously led and corresponding feelings being evoked. This is because everything happens unconsciously, as is the case with regard to the impulses that come from the subconscious into consciousness and cause corresponding actions and impulses. Basically, our psychologists and psychiatrists know only the subconscious or the subconscious, but not the unconscious, which is superior to the consciousness. So it is completely unknown in psychology and psychiatry, and consequently psychologists and psychiatrists have no idea what the unconscious subconscious is doing.
Which is actually the case, so there is nothing more to say about it.
Then I would like to address the following. The UN Security Council and the UN powers want to derail Syria's peace negotiations. According to the will of the 5 vetoing powers in the UN Security Council, the peace negotiations to end the Syrian civil war are to begin at the beginning of January, as you told me privately recently. Starting in January, an end to the conflict is to be negotiated, with the committee demanding a ceasefire. The USA and Russia should also take part in this Syria conference. I believe that such negotiations may have a momentary or short-term value, but they can never resolve conflicts once and for all. Even if peace decisions are made and implemented, they must always be considered only for a certain period of time, because peace treaties that have been made and agreed upon are only tenable until, on the one hand, new powers come to the helm and throw everything over the top again, or because, on the other hand, other powers again tinker with everything and provoke new fighting, etc. In addition, and this is how I see it, it has to be said that everywhere in non-neutral and democratically rejecting states, where a so-called peace is created purely through negotiation, peace negotiations, sooner or later rebellion, civil war, violence, comprehensive war, terrorism, coercion, and destruction will arise. And this is an inevitable consequence of this, because no peace system is created that is guaranteed by international and intentional control by a peacekeeping world organization. Such a global and all-state control could in principle only be useful through the commitment of a multinational peace struggle force, with all the states of the world adapting to such control without having to give up their own state competencies, but without having to adapt their policies and governance to a true democracy and neutrality.
A similar effort of this kind has been going on for quite some time now from Russian head of state Putin, albeit not in the sense of a multinational peace struggle force according to Hanok's system, but in an initial form of such a force. from which the stupid anti-Russian state leaders and their shadow leaders and advisors unreasonably turn away, although Putin is effective with his efforts of good sense. Saudi Arabia also wants to set up a military alliance, but this will encounter enormous difficulties and ridicule, as well as upsetting the Islamist state. Saudi Arabia is forging an Islamic anti-terror alliance for the purpose of fighting any terrorist organization. With this in mind, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia wants to create an Islamic military alliance in which 34 countries will join together to fight terrorism. The alliance will include Egypt, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Malaysia, Pakistan, and Turkey. The Sunni Saudi Arabia would take over the leadership of the alliance, with a joint center for the coordination and support of military operations to be set up in the capital Riyadh, to the extent that the alliance comes into being. Shiite Persia and Iran should not be taken into account for religious reasons, because the Persian Shiites do not get along with the Saudi Sunnis, although the Iranians compete with Saudi Arabia for influence in the region. The whole of the military alliance's enterprise is to be based on a far-reaching fight against any terrorist organization in the Middle East, with the military alliance fighting above all against terrorism in Afghanistan and Egypt, as well as in Iraq, Libya, and Syria. Actions that would have to be carried out above all against the Islamist State in Syria and Iraq should be coordinated internationally. However, the new military alliance should not only take action against the extremist militia Islamist State WSS, but against any terrorist organization at all with which the military alliance can be confronted. And as far as the USA is concerned, they have repeatedly called for a stronger engagement of the Gulf states in the fight against the radical IS militia in Syria and Iraq, which is increasingly exploiting the power vacuum in Libya and Yemen to spread. But since the USA itself is terrorist and addicted to world domination, the U.S. responsible state leaders of every color refuse to share their leading power with others, or even to give it up. This is in addition to the fact that they want to determine which states are to be included in a multi-state commitment, whereby Russia is not to be taken into account. It must also be clearly stated that the USA is only interested in promoting its own terror far and wide, because it is itself in the forefront of the spread of terrorism. In fact, the USA, through its armies and secret services, has committed and continues to commit torture, many and various war crimes, horrific murders, mutilations, and rapes throughout the world. And all this they can do completely unpunished under the eyes of the entire Earth humanity, or secretly, because it is on the whole dependent on the USA with regard to many things, and is therefore U.S.-American friendly, but also, like the USA, protects its own war criminals from justice. There is also no doubt that U.S. policy and all U.S.-dependent states, including the entire EU dictatorship as well as their U.S.-friendly media and the financial elite, are helping the U.S. to indulge in its world domination craze and to spread its terrorism unscathed throughout the world. So we can see the fact that they all initiate and control uprisings, wars, revolutions, and terror at will and earn a lot of money from them. Therefore, it is not surprising that they are all ill-hungry for profit, which they gain through dark, greasy, and criminal deals of all kinds, especially in connection with the arms industry. This is the real reason why all these criminal elements do not have the slightest interest in the creation of peace, freedom, harmony, and a common good on earth for the entire population. And when it comes to the Middle East, which we are talking about in relation to Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Syria, and the Islamist State, then it is especially about Israeli Zionist interests. These are the effective facts that I have to name according to our knowledge and findings.
Thanks for your opinion. Then we can talk privately about what you want to talk about.
Naturally.